I don't think I'll ever forget the sound of my brother's voice echoing through the church, cutting through the murmur of prayers and the clinking of rosary beads. "Get out, Lila," Ethan said, his words sharp enough to slice the air. "If you can't even bring yourself to cry for Mom and Dad, then you don't belong here." Every head turned toward me at once. The sound of my name lingered, sticky and humiliating, as though I'd been caught committing some kind of crime. I had been sitting in the front pew, hands folded in my lap, staring at the closed caskets that held the two people who meant more to me than life itself. My throat was raw, my chest heavy, but no tears came. They hadn't since the phone call 4 nights ago. I'd gone numb instead, frozen in some cruel state between denial and despair. But Ethan didn't understand that. He never had. I started, my voice small. The church was filled with cousins, aunts, uncles, old neighbors. All of them turned to me now, eyes widening, whispers starting. My cousin Marissa pressed her lips together, shaking her head like she was ashamed of me. I said, "Get out." Ethan snapped, his face red with fury. He stood at the podium where he'd just finished his eulogy, fists clenched like he was ready to drag me out himself. "You're sitting there like a statue, while we bury them. What kind of daughter are you?" My knees went weak. I gripped the edge of the pew to keep from collapsing. "They were my parents too," I whispered, but it came out strangled, pathetic. "And you have a funny way of showing it," he shot back. His voice cracked on the word parents, and I knew, God, I knew, that this was his grief speaking. But knowing didn't make it hurt any less. I looked toward Aunt Jo, who sat in the second row. She avoided my eyes. Uncle Raymond frowned like he agreed with Ethan. A few people muttered, "Shameful," under their breath. Shameful. At my parents' funeral, the walls of the church closed in. I couldn't breathe. Fine. If Ethan wanted me gone, I'd go. My legs carried me on autopilot, carrying me down the aisle past rows of family who refused to meet my gaze. I caught a few looks, pity from my cousin Tessa, judgment from Aunt Linda, confusion from old Mr. Harris, our neighbor since childhood. But the one that cut deepest was Ethan's glare, hot and unforgiving, following me all the way to the doors. The heavy oak creaked as I pushed them open, the air outside hitting me like a slap. The sun was too bright, the birds too cheerful, like the world didn't know my parents were gone. And just like that, I was outside, banished from my own mother and father's funeral. I leaned against the cold stone wall, my body trembling. The lump in my throat finally broke, but instead of sobbing, I just let out a bitter laugh that sounded alien to my own ears. Of course this was how it went. Of course Ethan, the golden child, the one who'd always been louder, stronger, more certain, got to decide what grief should look like. And of course I failed his test. But I hadn't failed Mom and Dad. They knew me. They knew I wasn't the kind of person to fall apart in front of a crowd. I loved them in quiet ways. Late night talks in the kitchen with Mom, long walks with Dad where we didn't even need words. They understood silence was my language. Even in love. Even in loss. Ethan never understood silence. He always mistook it for weakness, or worse, apathy. I slid down the wall, pulling my knees to my chest as the church doors opened again. My cousin Tessa slipped out, her heels clicking on the steps. She crouched beside me, her soft brown eyes filled with worry. "Lila," she whispered, "don't listen to him. He's just broken right now." "I know," I croaked. My throat burned. But he didn't have to do that. Not in front of everyone. Her hand squeezed mine. "He's lashing out. You know how he is. You grieve differently, and that's okay." I nodded, though my chest ached like a stone pressing into me. Inside the church, I could hear Ethan's voice rising again, returning to the service like nothing had happened. Like casting out his only sister was just another part of the ceremony. My parents were being lowered into the ground, and I wasn't allowed to stand by their graves. Because I didn't perform grief the way Ethan demanded. And that was the moment, sitting on the cold church steps, humiliated and furious, that I realized Ethan and I weren't just siblings anymore. We were enemies. Enemies bound by blood, by the same loss, but enemies all the same. I didn't go back into the church that day. By the time the service ended and the caskets were lowered into the ground, I was already gone. I walked home instead of riding with anyone, my black heels blistering my feet, the wind blowing my hair into my face. I wanted to disappear. But grief is a shadow. You can't outrun it. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, I kept replaying Ethan's words in my head. His voice, full of venom. "What kind of daughter are you?" It wasn't the first time he'd asked me that kind of question. Not directly, maybe, but in 1,000 sideways ways since we were kids. Ethan had always been the loud one, the responsible one, the one who stepped up first. When Dad's car broke down, Ethan was 14 and already under the hood with a wrench, grease on his hands, telling me to stand back, like I was useless. When Mom was sick with the flu, Ethan strutted around making soup and reminding everyone that he was taking care of things. And I was the quiet one. I read books on the porch. I drew pictures in the margins of my homework. I didn't fight to be heard. I didn't fight him for the spotlight. But Mom always told me, Lila, you see things your brother doesn't. You don't have to shout to matter. She'd cup my cheek with her soft hand and smile like she believed it with her whole heart. Dad, too, he'd take me fishing at the lake on Saturday mornings, just the two of us. We'd sit in silence, lines cast into the water, and he'd say, not everything worth saying needs words, kiddo. He got it. He got me. Ethan hated that. He used to roll his eyes when Mom praised me for something small, or when Dad laughed at one of my quiet jokes. You baby her, he'd snap. She doesn't do anything and you still baby her. We fought, of course. Siblings do. But there was something sharper in Ethan's resentment. Like he was keeping score. I remember one Christmas. I must have been 12, Ethan 16, when Mom gave me a sketchbook with my name engraved on the cover. I thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever owned. Ethan's gift had been a set of tools, practical and heavy. He sulked the whole evening, accusing Mom of favoring me. You think her scribbles mean more than me actually fixing things around here? He yelled. Dad had to pull him aside, calm him down. But that night I lay in bed staring at my sketchbook and wondering if I'd stolen something from him just by existing. That's the thing about Ethan, he never just let me be me. I always had to prove my worth, prove I cared, prove I wasn't just the useless little sister he saw me as. When our parents died, that need multiplied. The night of the accident, I was at home. It was raining hard, and the phone rang close to midnight. It was Aunt Jo's voice on the line, trembling, saying there'd been a collision on the interstate. A semi had jackknifed, and Mom and Dad's car had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. I remember dropping the phone. I remember Ethan arriving 20 minutes later, drenched in rain, his face pale but his jaw set like stone. He took over immediately, calling the hospital, calling relatives, talking to the police. He barely looked at me. When I finally asked, "Are they?" he snapped, "Yes, Lila, they're gone. Do you understand that? They're dead." I collapsed into the couch cushions, gasping for breath. He stood there, hands on his hips, watching me like I was wasting time. "We don't have time for hysterics," he muttered. "We need to plan." Plan. That was Ethan's answer to everything. The next few days blurred into a haze of paperwork, visitors, casseroles left on the porch. Ethan orchestrated it all like a general in battle. He ordered flowers, argued with the funeral home about costs, barked instructions at cousins. He even chose the readings for the service without asking me. Whenever I tried to help, he brushed me off. "You wouldn't understand. I've got it. Just stay out of the way." It stung, but I let him. Because what else could I do? He was always like that, commanding, certain, convinced he knew best. But grief isn't a performance. It's not something you can manage with lists and orders. Ethan didn't see that. The night before the funeral, he cornered me in the kitchen. His eyes were bloodshot, his suit jacket wrinkled from sleeping in it. "Tomorrow," he said, pointing a finger at me, "you're going to show up and act like you care. Don't sit there like a zombie." I flinched. "Ethan, I do care. You don't get to tell me how to." "Don't start, Lila," he snapped, cutting me off. "I don't want to hear excuses. Do you think people won't notice? They'll say you didn't love them. They'll say you're cold. And you'll prove them right." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Because part of me believed him. I wanted to scream that he didn't understand me, that my silence wasn't emptiness, it was survival. That if I let myself cry, I'd never stop. But he wouldn't hear it. Ethan never heard me when I needed him to. So I nodded. I promised I'd try. And he left the kitchen looking satisfied, like he'd won something. And then the next day, he threw me out anyway. By the time I reached this point in my thoughts, lying on my childhood bed with the shadows of the room pressing in, I realized something. Ethan and I weren't grieving the same parents. Not really. He was grieving the parents he thought he had to prove himself to. I was grieving the parents who had loved me exactly as I was. And that difference was going to tear us apart. The house never felt so loud. Not from music or laughter the way it used to, but from voices, relatives, neighbors, people I barely remembered who suddenly swarmed in like they had a right to our grief. The front door never stopped opening and closing. Casseroles, sympathy cards, flowers. Hushed conversations that weren't really hushed at all. She looks so pale. Poor Ethan, having to handle everything. I don't know how Lila's managing, doesn't seem like she's even crying. Every whisper stuck to me like burrs, and I hated myself for hearing them. Ethan was in his element. He stood in the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, scribbling notes on a yellow legal pad. His voice was sharp, commanding. "No, we don't want lilies, they're funereal." "Yes," I said, "roses." "White. Make sure the arrangements are symmetrical." I sat at the dining table, staring at the untouched lasagna Aunt Linda had dropped off. The smell of it made me nauseous. "You need to eat," Ethan barked, covering the phone with his hand. I'm not hungry, I murmured. He gave me the look. The same one he'd given me when I was 7 and refused to finish my vegetables. Mom and Dad wouldn't want you starving yourself. That was his line for everything those days. Mom and Dad wouldn't want this. Mom and Dad would expect that. He wielded their memory like a weapon, and I didn't have the strength to fight back. Relatives started camping in our living room. Aunt Jo, Uncle Raymond, cousins Marissa and Tessa. They all adored Ethan. He was the pillar, the hero, the one keeping it all together. And me? I was the shadow drifting silently through the halls. At night, when the house finally quieted, I'd sit in my parents' bedroom, inhaling the faint scent of Mom's lavender lotion, staring at Dad's watch on the nightstand. The silence was unbearable, but also the only time I felt close to them. Ethan would find me there sometimes. He'd stand in the doorway, arms crossed. "You should be in your room," he'd say. "You look strange in here." "I just miss them," I'd whisper. He'd shake his head. "Then stop hiding and start helping. People are asking questions, Lila. They think you don't care." That word again. Care. Like grief had to be loud and public, like silence wasn't its own language. The relatives fed into it. Aunt Linda patted Ethan's shoulder one night and said, "You're so strong, dear. I don't know how you do it. Poor Lila, she's always been a little cold." I was standing right there. She didn't even lower her voice. Ethan didn't defend me. He never did. He just tightened his jaw and said, "I'll handle it. Handle it. Control it. Manage it." That was his way. But mine? Mine was to retreat. I'd go into the backyard late at night, sit on the porch swing, and stare at the stars. Sometimes I'd whisper to Mom and Dad, telling them things I couldn't tell Ethan. That I was scared. That I felt erased. That I didn't know how to be the sister he wanted. The night before the funeral, the tension finally snapped. The house was still buzzing with cousins and uncles, everyone ironing black suits and polishing shoes. Ethan cornered me again in the kitchen, his sleeves rolled up, tie hanging loose. "You're going to sit in the front row tomorrow," he ordered, "and when the priest speaks, you're going to cry. Do you hear me? You're not going to sit there like a stone. People will notice." I felt my chest tighten. "Ethan, you can't order me to cry." "You think this is about you?" His eyes blazed. "This is about them. About appearances. Do you want people thinking their daughter didn't love them?" I swallowed hard. "I love them in my own way." "Then show it," he snapped. "Or stay home." The words chilled me. I didn't realize how close he was to meaning them. But I nodded. I said, "Fine," just to end the fight. Because part of me was terrified he'd actually follow through. I went to bed that night knowing tomorrow would be unbearable. What I didn't know, what I could know, was that Ethan was preparing to make good on his threat. And in front of everyone, he would. When I finally walked back into the house after the funeral, the silence was deafening. The relatives who had filled the rooms all week were gone, leaving behind half-eaten casseroles, crumpled tissues, and the faint smell of too many perfumes mixing in the air. I thought maybe I'd get a moment to breathe. But Ethan was waiting for me in the living room, arms folded, tie loosened, face still flushed with the righteous fire of the eulogy. "You embarrass me," he said flatly. I stared at him, stunned. "You embarrass me, Ethan. You kicked me out in front of everyone. At Mom and Dad's funeral." He didn't even flinch. "You were making a fool of yourself, sitting there like you didn't give a damn. People noticed. People noticed because you screamed at me." My voice cracked. "You turned their funeral into a circus." His jaw tightened, but he didn't back down. "I did what had to be done. Someone had to stand up for them. You weren't grieving the way they deserved. That broke something in me. Don't you dare tell me how to grieve. Don't you dare act like you loved them more than I did." For the first time since the accident, Ethan's eyes flickered, just for a second, with something raw. Fear, maybe, or rage at himself. But it vanished quickly, replaced by cold certainty. "You can lie to yourself all you want, Lila. But everyone saw it. They all know who really cared for Mom and Dad. And it wasn't you." I stormed upstairs before he could see the tears welling. The door slammed behind me, rattling the frame. For hours I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, my body stiff with anger. But Ethan was right about one thing. People did notice. The phone calls started the next morning. "Aunt Linda, sweetheart, I don't know what's gotten into you, but Ethan is so strong. Try to be more like him." "Uncle Raymond, you need to support your brother, not fight him. He's handling so much." Even Marissa, my own cousin, texted me. "I'm sorry, Lila, but Ethan was right. It really did look like you didn't care." Their words stung worse than the humiliation. Because they proved Ethan had won. He controlled the story now. Ethan, the dutiful son. Lila, the cold daughter. And I was too exhausted to fight it. For days I avoided everyone. I walked the neighborhood late at night when it was empty, my footsteps crunching on the gravel. I didn't answer texts. I let calls go to voicemail. The house felt like a tomb, Mom's floral curtains still swaying in the breeze, Dad's slippers by the couch, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like Ethan's. One evening, unable to sleep, I wandered into Dad's office. The desk lamp still had a faint layer of dust on it, the way he always left it because he hated overhead lighting. His leather chair creaked as I lowered myself into it. That's when I noticed the envelope. It was tucked under a stack of old bills, with my name written across the front in Dad's handwriting. My heart stuttered. Hands trembling, I opened it. Inside was a letter. Lila, it began, if you're reading this, it means your mom, and I didn't get the chance to say these words out loud. We want you to know something important. We trust you. You've always had a quiet strength, even when others couldn't see it. When the time comes, don't let anyone silence you. We left something for you in the safe deposit box. You'll understand why when you see it. I froze. The words blurred as tears finally spilled down my cheeks. The first real tears since the accident. Trust you. Don't let anyone silence you. For the first time in days, I felt my parents' voices in the room. They believed in me, even when no one else did, even when Ethan didn't. But the letter also left me with questions. What had they left for me? What did they mean by when the time comes? I folded the paper carefully, tucking it into my pocket like a lifeline. And I knew, deep down, that Ethan couldn't find out about it. Not yet. Because whatever Mom and Dad had meant for me, it might just be the one thing that could change everything between us. I couldn't stop thinking about the letter. I carried it in my pocket everywhere I went, unfolding it at night like a secret prayer. We trust you. Don't let anyone silence you. The words felt heavier each time I read them, like Mom and Dad had left me not just comfort, but a responsibility. 2 days after the funeral, I went to the bank. My hands shook as I signed the forms, the clerk leading me to a small, windowless room. She placed a narrow safe deposit box on the table. Inside was a folder, thick with documents, and a small velvet pouch. The folder contained papers, legal ones. Mom and Dad's will. I skimmed through, my pulse racing. Ethan and I were both listed, of course, but there was something more. They had named me as executor. Not Ethan. Me. I sat back, stunned. Ethan had been the one taking charge, barking orders, controlling everything. But Mom and Dad hadn't chosen him. They'd chosen me. My hands fumbled with the pouch. Inside was a locket, Mom's, the one she used to wear every Sunday. I opened it, and there we were, a photo of her holding me as a baby, Dad's arm around us both. Opposite it, a slip of paper folded tiny. Lila, this belongs to you. You were always our heart. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. By the time I left the bank, I knew I couldn't keep this from Ethan. But I also knew it would break something between us. Maybe it already had. The showdown came that evening. Ethan was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, sorting stacks of condolence cards like he was managing inventory at a store. When I set the folder on the table, his head snapped up. What's this? The will, I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. I went to the bank today. His eyes narrowed. You went without me? I had to. It was addressed to me. The vein in his temple twitched. What the hell are you talking about? I slid the executor page across to him. His gaze scanned it, and I watched the color drain from his face. They made you executor? His voice was low, dangerous. You? Yes, I whispered. They trusted me. He slammed his fist against the table, the stack of cards scattering. This is wrong. They wouldn't do this. I've been the one handling everything, keeping this family together while you what? Sit in your room and mope. I didn't ask for this. My voice cracked, but I didn't back down. They chose me. Maybe because they knew you'd do exactly this. Try to control everything. They trusted me to do what's right. His laugh was bitter, jagged. Right. Little Miss Silent, who couldn't even shed a tear at their funeral. You think you're the strong one. Tears stung my eyes, but I let them fall this time. Strength isn't yelling the loudest, Ethan. Strength isn't humiliating your sister in front of a church full of people. Mom and Dad saw me. They knew I loved them. Why is that so hard for you to believe? He stood there, chest heaving, and for once he had no quick retort. I pressed on. You've always needed to prove yourself. Every holiday, every chore, every fight, we were kids, Ethan, but you treated me like competition. I never wanted to compete with you. I just wanted to be your sister. His face crumpled, but only for a second before the mask snapped back into place. You don't get it. I had to be the strong one. You think I wanted it? You think I didn't notice how Mom coddled you? How Dad laughed at your quiet little jokes while I was breaking my back to earn their approval? They gave you everything without asking. I had to earn every scrap. The words hit me like stones. For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the one desperate for praise, always fighting shadows only he could see. They loved you too, I said softly. You just never let yourself believe it. His eyes glistened, but he turned away, fists clenching at his sides. Behind us, a voice cleared. I turned to see Aunt Jo in the doorway, her expression caught between shock and guilt. She'd heard everything. And by the way the floor creaked upstairs, I knew others had too. The walls of the house weren't thick enough to contain our war. Ethan's image, the strong son, the protector, was cracking. And for once, I wasn't the one being silenced. That night, he stormed out, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. I sat at the kitchen table, clutching the locket in my fist, the letter heavy in my pocket. For the first time since the funeral, I felt like maybe I wasn't alone. Mom and Dad had seen me. Maybe now, finally, others would too. But as the silence stretched, I realized something. Whether Ethan ever came back or not, nothing between us would ever be the same. The next morning, the house was too quiet. No clattering dishes, no Ethan pacing and barking orders, no sound of forced normalcy. Just the steady tick of the kitchen clock and the faint hum of the fridge. Ethan hadn't come home. Part of me expected him to, slamming doors, still brimming with rage. But the silence held, and with it, a hollow ache in my chest. For all his cruelty, he was still my brother. I sat at the table, with the wool spread out before me. Aunt Jo hovered in the doorway, nursing her coffee like it was a shield. You know, she said carefully, your parents must have had a reason for naming you executor. They weren't the type to play favorites. I traced my finger over Mom's signature, her handwriting looping gentle and familiar. They trusted me to keep things from blowing up, but maybe they knew it would blow up anyway. Jo sighed. Families, sometimes the ugliest truths only come out when someone's gone. But that doesn't mean they didn't love you both. Her words should have comforted me, but they felt thin. Love didn't erase scars. Love didn't stop Ethan from humiliating me in front of everyone I knew. Love didn't change the fact that he saw me as competition, not a sister. By afternoon, Ethan finally returned. His eyes were red, jaw tight, as if he'd fought an invisible war all night. We stood in the hallway, just the two of us, silence stretching like a wire pulled taut. I read the rest of the will, he said finally. His voice was low, ragged. It's fair. You're executor, but everything's split evenly. I know, I said. He nodded, like he'd rehearsed this moment. I shouldn't have said those things. At the funeral. Or yesterday. His gaze flicked to me, then away. But you need to understand, Lila. I can't just undo the way I've always felt. I wanted their approval so badly, and it felt like you didn't even have to try. It's ugly, but it's the truth. I swallowed hard. And you punished me for it. His eyes glistened, but he didn't argue. For the first time, I didn't feel like the smaller sibling. I felt steady, grounded. I love them too, I whispered. Just because I didn't cry the way you did doesn't mean I loved them any less. Grief doesn't look the same for everyone. He gave a short, bitter laugh. Guess I needed you to cry so I could believe you cared. How messed up is that? I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't reopen wounds. That evening, the family gathered one last time to divide belongings. I took Mom's locket and Dad's favorite book. Ethan took the watch he'd always admired. It should have felt final, but instead it felt like a fragile truce, something that could shatter with one wrong word. As relatives drifted out, Ethan lingered by the door. I don't know if I can fix this, he admitted. His voice cracked just enough that I believed the vulnerability was real. But I want to try. I clutched the locket at my chest. Trying is better than pretending. He nodded once, then left, the night air swallowing him whole. Weeks passed. Life settled into a strange rhythm, grief less sharp, but never gone. Ethan and I spoke occasionally, stilted but civil. Some days I wondered if we'd ever be more than that. Maybe the best we could manage was coexistence. One evening, I sat on the porch with Dad's book in my lap, the sunset bleeding orange across the sky. For the first time, I let myself cry, quiet, steady tears that soaked the pages. And it felt right, like the grief had finally found its way out on its own terms. I didn't need Ethan to see it. I didn't need anyone to validate it. Mom's words in her letter came back to me. Don't let anyone silence you. And for once, I knew I wouldn't. That was the ending. Not neat, not perfect, but real. Ethan and I weren't healed. Not completely. But the truth was out, and I wasn't invisible anymore. Maybe that was enough. A year later, I found myself standing at my parents' graves again. The grass had grown in, neat rows of green softening the raw earth. Someone had left fresh flowers. Ethan, probably. He never told me when he came, but I always knew. I knelt down, setting a single white lily on the headstone. Hey, Mom. Hey, Dad. My voice was steady, though my throat tightened. I'm okay. I think Ethan is too. Or at least he's trying. The wind rustled through the trees, gentle, almost like a reply. I touched the locket around my neck. the one Mom had saved for me. Inside was still that little note. The paper had worn thin from me opening it so often, but the words were etched into me now. Don't let anyone silence you. For the first time, I wasn't living in Ethan's shadow, or waiting for someone else to tell me my feelings were valid. I was enough. As I stood to leave, I saw a car pull up. Ethan stepped out, his shoulders stiff, hands shoved in his pockets. He gave me a nod, awkward, tentative, but it was something. I nodded back. And in that moment, I realized healing wasn't always a grand reconciliation. Sometimes it was this. Two siblings, broken in different ways, standing side by side at the edge of loss, learning how to move forward without losing themselves. I walked away lighter than I had in years. Not because everything was fixed, but because I finally believed I had the right to carry my grief my way. And that was enough.